This is a podcast from the British Library. For more information, visit www.bl.uk/podcast.
Hello, my name is Ellie Russell, and today I'll be speaking to Michelle Brown about her new book, The Lindisfarne Gospels and the Early Medieval World, which explores this masterpiece within the context of other related treasures, places and archaeological sites. Good morning, Michelle.
Hi, Ellie.
The Lindisfarne Gospels was created in about 715 to 20, at a time in history that we know relatively little about. Can you tell us what else was going on in the world at that time? Do you think the monks at Lindisfarne were aware of any of the events happening in the outside world?
Yeah, it's a period that sometimes is called the Dark Ages, when the only thing that's dark about it is the level of our knowledge. It's full of vibrancy, colour, and things that we're still working through the implications of today. But increasingly, new research, and especially archaeology, and archaeology in the shelves of libraries, is bringing to light new material and new ways of looking at things, along with new technologies that are helping to fill in our gaps. It's a time when the world was moving through a great stage of transition from late antiquity into a period of the beginnings of nation states, etc. It's a time when Islam, for example, was spreading rapidly around the eastern and southern Mediterranean, and people were finding new ways of living together as neighbours with different traditions. And a time when, at the far eastern extremities of what was then the known world, Buddhism is being introduced from mainland China to Japan, having a revolutionary impact upon those islands. Closer to home, Britain and Ireland, we find that Christianity is increasingly being reintroduced to the pagan settlers from Germania, the Anglo-Saxons from southern Scandinavia and Germany, who are carving out territory for themselves as warlords and settler farmers, alongside the inhabitants of post-Roman Britain and the Celts. And so again, many different traditions, all having to confront one another, but also find ways of reconciling and collaborating. I think the monks at Lindisfarne were far more clued up than we might think about what was going on in the rest of the world. For example, they had a thing called On the Sacred Places, which was the travel guide of a bishop called Archaeological from Gaul, who travelled in Egypt and in Caesarea, and who got shipwrecked on Iona, a little island off of Scotland that Lindisfarne was connected to, and spent Christmas there dictating his reminiscences of his travels and drawing pictures of where he'd been on wax tablets. All of this was available. And some of my own research recently in places like Sinai have shown that there were Anglo-Saxon scribes and artists working there. So yes, I think there were direct lines of communication.
Why do you think this book was created at Lindisfarne? Was there any special significance to that particular place, or could it just as easily have been made at another religious centre, such as Canterbury or York?
Lindisfarne is also known as Holy Island. It's a little tidal island in the North Sea, almost on the borders between England and Scotland, which is cut off from the mainland twice every day by the tides, a place where tides and seasons rule, but also a place that's plugged into the biggest communication highway of its day, the sea. It's a place which was linked to the traditions of Ireland. It had been founded in 635 as a monastery by monks from Iona, which had been founded by the Irish Saint Columba. And it was a place that was having to work within that tradition, but also the traditions of the Roman Church. It had been involved in things like the G8 summits of its time, held in Britain, to try and actually maintain dialogue around the known world as a tryout for big councils in Constantinople. It's very plugged in, and it has the job, unlike places such as Canterbury and York, which are a little more mainstream and adhering to the traditions of Rome, it has the job of actually reconciling those traditions with those of peoples in the north of England and in Pictland, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, etc. And so you find that it has to tread a line between respecting and bringing together all of those traditions. And I think it's that and the rallying point of the hero who's put forward to represent that idea of collaboration and living together, St Cuthbert, who was Bishop of Lindisfarne and who died in 687, that means that Lindisfarne is very, very well placed to actually undertake that process of reconciliation and to begin fostering learning, but also a tradition of active social engagement, of actually getting out into people's lives, running massive humanitarian aid programmes, etc., as well as spreading a message of hope, creating stunningly beautiful works such as the Lindisfarne Gospels to act as a focal point for that when pilgrims flock to the island.
The pages of the Lindisfarne Gospels are decorated with beautiful spirals, circles and interlacing designs that make the reader think immediately of Celtic and Anglo-Saxon art. Can you explain a bit about these motifs and how they were used on other things such as metalwork, for example jewellery, and stone, like gravestones?
Yeah, this was a time when people dealt in sign and symbol. They'd have no trouble decoding the equivalent of a Calvin Klein ad. People signal who they are, what they believe, where they've come from, their wealth, their status, their ethnicity, by what you see, like we do with our clothes, our hair, etc., our technologies as well. And so you find that somebody looking at a page of artwork in Lindisfarne would be able to pick out, for example, the spiral work that goes right back to Celtic Iron Age Latin art, and recall perhaps the brooch that their Irish great-great-grandmother had left to them, whereas somebody else from a Germanic background would pick up on the interlaced animal and bird forms writhing through the initials and think of the sort of metalwork that their great-great-grandfather had on his belt buckle when he was a member of the Federal Auxiliary Troops in the Roman army. And so people would find something within all of those motifs that made them feel at home, so that when the maker of the Lindisfarne Gospels wove these rich mixtures and warp and weft of symbols into something that reflected the cultures stretching from the watery wildernesses of the Atlantic to the deserts of Syria, Palestine, the Holy Land and Egypt, you'd find that people would know what was familiar, but they'd also question what was strange and exotic. And we find that there are references, obviously, to things that people are familiar with. The metalwork of Sutton Hoo, for example, and new finds such as the Prittlewell and Staffordshire hoard, which are dealt with in the book, bring into play the sort of bells that will be ringing in people's minds when the artist of the manuscript is actually making reference. And again, you find that the carpet pages appear in stone, in monuments such as Aberlemno, in Pictland, the land of the tattooed ones, as Caesar called it, what we now know as Scotland, where you find the cross symbol in Northumbrian style juxtaposed with battle scenes on the back, which may actually depict the Picts beating the Northumbrians. So all of these things chime in together and create a visual rhetoric for a time when most people couldn't read, but the power of the word was transforming society. Those who were brought up on tales such as the equivalent of Beowulf in the Mead Hall would adopt pacifism. Kings were freeing slaves and being assassinated in Martin Luther King's style for transforming society. And it was the word that stood very much at the heart of that. And the decoration of the word, paying honour to it and its transforming role in society, its laws, its customs, but ultimately deriving its identity from the fact that for them this was Logos, this was the word of God, their ultimate authority.
It seems incredible that the book is the work of just one scribe. Can you say what clues in the book have led you to this conclusion and describe the conditions that Eadfrith would have been working in when he wrote it?
The book is written in Latin. It's one of the best copies of Jerome's Vulgate translation of the Gospels, but between the lines, in about 950, an Old English gloss was added. It makes that the oldest surviving copy of the Gospels in the English language. And the glossator, Aldred, who was a later monk of the community of St Cuthbert, also left a colophon, which is something at the end of the book saying who he thought had made the book originally. Now, something written 200 years or so after the fact can't be taken at face value as evidence, and he's definitely got his own agendas. But I think he was copying inscriptions from earlier metalwork and fly-leaves in the manuscript, and he says that it was made by Bishop Eadfrith, it was bound by his successor, Bishop Athelwold, and that Bilfrith the anchorite made the gold and gems that adorned it. Now, as an anchorite, Bilfrith doesn't have much of a career structure, but we can trace a bit of the career of the two bishops. And Eadfrith, who was Bishop of Lindisfarne from 698 to 721, was reframing the cult of Cuthbert to serve these agendas of bringing people together, somebody who taught those with wealth and power that there were responsibilities that came with that to actually helping people live good, peaceful, fruitful lives. So we have the colophon to go on. Within the Columban tradition, you would have to be one of the most spiritually tried and tested and gifted members of the community, and there's a tradition of the bishop abbots being hero scribes such as Columba himself, so it would make sense that somebody, even a busy bishop running half of northern England and southern Scotland, would take time out to engage in his own spiritual work, taking the pen and going into the desert of the book as Cuthbert had gone on to his hermitage rock of Lindisfarne. And when you look at the pages using digital imagery, multispectral observation techniques, etc., you can see quite clearly the mind of this master artist scribe at work in order to achieve his grandiose vision, because there was no such tradition really of illuminating books to that high level before. He invents new technologies. You can see the point at which he realises that the metal point he's ruling the lines with is a pencil. It's got lead in it. And he's away. He's invented the lead pencil. He designs everything on the back of the pages. He's invented the light box, using a transparent writing surface and backlighting so that he can keep his own very intricate designs if he needs to refer back to them on the other side of the page, using principles of what he saw as divine geometry, which are still viewed as some of the basic building blocks mathematically of creation, Pythagorean number symbolism, etc., the golden mean. He's also a great experimental chemist. He can make about 90 colours that Photoshop struggles with, by using, as the Raman pigment analysis, using lasers that we conducted on a whole group of manuscripts has shown, using just 6 locally available plants and rocks. He knows that if he boils up that particular lichen from that rock, that it's going to give him a purple that he can get 40 shades out if he changes the acidity and alkalinity that he introduces. Stalurine gives him a nice rich ruby red, for example. He can't get lapis lazuli from the Himalayas, but he knows about it, and he fakes it by boiling up woad plants that are grown locally and suspending crystals of hoof and horn animal gum within the blue pigment to give the surface texture of ground lapis rock. That's because its exotic nature means something to him, as well as the symbolism of the colour. So, all in all, we can see that hand, who I think probably is the busy bishop, Eadfrith, shaping his vision of the world and of eternity and the agendas for he and his community to serve within the world.
Thank you for speaking to me today, Michelle. The Lindisfarne Gospels and the Early Medieval World is available from the British Library shop and online shop for £25.
You've been listening to a British Library podcast. For more information, visit www